The city was alive with restless lights and endless horns as Daniel pulled his worn jacket tighter against the chill of another night shift, the hum of engines around him, mixing with the low rhythm of rain that painted silver trails across the windshield. He had been driving for years, ferrying strangers through their own stories. But this night felt different, though he couldn't tell why. Not yet. Something in the air whispered that everything ordinary about his life was about to break. Had taken the ride request, without thinking a pickup at a luxury hotel downtown, a name that barely registered on his tired mind. But when the glass doors opened and a young woman in a crimson coat stepped out, her eyes catching the light like two quiet storms, he felt his breath snag for a second. She looked too poised, too untouchable to be alone. Yet she moved like someone who didn't belong there, as if running from the weight of her own name. Daniel offered a polite nod, unaware that his life was about to split in two. She introduced herself simply as Elise, her voice calm but sharp beneath the surface, a tremor of urgency that didn't match her composed smile. He noticed her clutching a phone tightly, knuckles pale under the glow. Of the dashboard, he asked where to, and she gave a destination that didn't fit her clothes or the hotel she came from, somewhere on the edge of the city near the water. When he asked again, she only said, "Just drive, please," and he did the silence between them, thick and fragile. The road stretched ahead, slick with rain and lit by the passing blur of street lamps. She kept glancing back through the rear window. Every few minutes, Daniel caught her reflection in the mirror, each time a flicker of fear crossed her face, before she masked it again. He wanted to ask what she was running from, but something told him not to intrude, not yet, because her story was already unraveling behind them, unseen and unstoppable. A black car appeared in the side mirror, its headlights dim but steady. It followed too long, too close. Daniel's instincts sharpened a memory of old training from years ago, before the divorce, before life fell apart. When he was still more than a driver kicked in, he slowed. At the next light, the car slowed too. Elise noticed it too. Her breath hitched softly, and in that moment the truth between them started to take shape. Though neither dared to say it aloud, Daniel made a sharp turn onto a narrow side street, hoping. To shake the tail, the tires splashed through puddles, and the engine growled low. He told her to hold on, gripping the wheel tighter than before. The other car followed faster now, too fast. Elise pressed a hand against the dash, eyes wide, the silence. Turned electric, filled with the weight of everything they weren't saying and everything about to happen. She whispered something, then a name, maybe a warning. He couldn't tell over the pounding of his own heart. He looked back, just long enough to see the black car's door open, a flash of motion, a shadow stepping out. And that was when Daniel realized they weren't after him. They were after her. The rain fell harder, masking the sound of tires and breath and fear, all blending into one endless hum of danger closing in. He turned again, heading toward the docks where the road met the water. A place few cars traveled at night, Elise's phone buzzed on her lap. She didn't answer, her eyes locked on the mirrors. Daniel could see her, mind racing through possibilities, through names, through betrayals she couldn't yet voice. He asked again, "Who are they?" And this time she answered with a truth too heavy to ignore. She said, "They work for my family." The words hung in the air like fog before vanishing into the dark. Daniel didn't understand at first, but when she said the word heiress, something clicked. Her clothes, her car waiting at the hotel, the security that wasn't there, all of it lined up in a way that made sense. And didn't at all. He had seen faces like hers on magazine covers once, but never this close. Never scared. Never human. Like this, the headlights behind them grew brighter, and he knew running wouldn't be enough now. He drove faster down the narrow road, the sound of water growing nearer. Elise held her breath, the pursuing car still behind them, closing in. Daniel's pulse roared in his ears. He could see the end of the dock ahead, the water dark and endless beyond it. There was no way forward, only the decision that had to be made now or never. Elise grabbed his arm and said something that sounded like, "Don't stop," but he didn't listen. He never had been the type to freeze when it mattered most. The car behind them surged forward, its bumper grazing theirs. Daniel spun the wheel hard. The world twisted sideways for a heartbeat. Then the car slammed to a stop half on the pier. Half in the air, a deafening crack of metal against wood, and the hiss of steam filled the air. Elise's window shattered, the cold rain pouring in. Daniel reached across, pulling her close as the world tilted farther, and the edge gave way. Beneath them, the sound of the sea swallowing them whole. For a moment, there was nothing, only the chaos of water, and light and noise. Then Daniel's instincts kicked in again. Air was gone, but his grip on her stayed firm. He found her hand, pulling her toward the faint shimmer of the surface. Her eyes met his wide with fear, and something else. A trust born, not of choice, but of desperation. He could see the reflection of flashing lights above the surface, voices shouting distant and muffled. But he couldn't let go. Not yet. Not until he knew she was safe. They broke the surface together, gasping the rain, still falling like shards from the sky. Elise coughed, clinging to him as they drifted toward the shore. The black car above them had stopped, its figures silhouetted at the edge of the dock, watching but not moving. Daniel pulled her closer, half swimming, half dragging through the water, every muscle in his body screaming. But he didn't stop, not even when her whisper came again. Softer this time. "They won't let me go on the shore." Daniel collapsed, breathing hard, the waves licking at their feet. Elise trembled beside him, her hair plastered to her face. Her eyes filled with questions and apologies. But before he could ask anything, a sound split the night. A distant wail growing closer. Headlights cutting through the rain, blue, red, and white flashing. In the dark, she turned toward it with an expression that wasn't relief, but dread. And he realized whoever was coming next might not be there to help them. The light grew brighter, the sound louder, and Daniel's hand instinctively tightened around. Hers, he didn't know if he was saving her or being dragged into something he couldn't escape. Either way, he knew this night was far from over. The night had fallen over the city, casting long shadows across the academy grounds, and the air smelled of rain and asphalt. Marie led the Admiral through narrow alleys and hidden passages, her steps silent and deliberate. He followed, struggling to keep pace, every sense alert, because the past was no longer confined to files or medals. It was alive, moving alongside them, and he realized that the story they were uncovering could change everything if it reached the wrong ears. She paused at a bridge overlooking the dark river, the water reflecting faint city lights, and whispered that the river had been witness to survival. Before that, some truths were carried in currents and tides, not in paperwork. He felt a chill as the memory of her words from earlier seeped back into him, that the mission he thought he understood was only part of a larger story, that the men listed as casualties had been rescued in secret, and that she had been at the center of it all. The sound of footsteps echoed behind them, faint at first, then louder like a warning drum. Marie did not glance back. She continued moving, guiding the Admiral through paths only she knew. The city felt unfamiliar. Despite being the same streets, he had walked thousands of times, because tonight danger had a rhythm, and it followed them, invisible, yet persistent, and he realized with a cold certainty that they were being hunted not for themselves, but for what they knew. She led him to a hidden boat, docked in shadows, and whispered instructions on how to navigate the river quietly. He followed her onto the vessel, feeling the cold of the water seeping into his bones, and understanding that every movement mattered now. Every breath could betray them. The city lights blurred behind them, and the sound of a motor engine in the distance confirmed his suspicion that someone had begun to pursue them, and that the night was far from safe. Marie took the lead, guiding the boat through narrow canals, twisting and turning. With skill born of experience, she said little, only enough to give directions. The admiral gripped the edge and tried to follow her movements. The tension in the air was so thick, he could feel it pressing against his chest and every shadow along. The bank seemed alive, waiting for them to make a mistake. He understood that their survival depended on her instincts and that hesitation could be fatal. She glanced at him finally and said that the people after them had resources that they would not hesitate to use. He nodded, aware that this was no longer a matter of uncovering history, but of protecting their lives and the truths carried in the metal. And in her memory, the river beneath them seemed to pulse like a living entity carrying secrets from the past into the present. And he realized that the night itself was an accomplice to both danger and revelation. The boat slowed near a warehouse hidden behind reeds and darkness. She instructed him to stay low as she scouted the perimeter. Moving like a shadow, he watched and felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him, knowing that if they were caught, the consequences could be deadly for both of them. The silence around him was broken only by distant city sounds masking the approach of unseen observers, and he felt the rush of fear and adrenaline intertwining in his chest. She returned quickly and whispered that they would need to split if necessary, that stealth was their best ally, and that the secrets inside the warehouse could not be left unguarded. He understood instinctively that this was no ordinary mission, that the envelope in his hands contained evidence that could rewrite history, and that the people who had tried to bury the truth would stop at nothing to retrieve or destroy it, and the first figures of pursuit flickered in the distance like shadows waiting to strike. They climbed into the warehouse cautiously, every step deliberate. Marie guiding him to a concealed entrance, doors creaking softly under her touch, and inside the air smelled of dust and old paper. The files and recordings she had promised lay in stacks in dim light. He realized that this was the repository of decades of secrecy, that each document represented courage, deceit, and survival, and that retrieving it would place them directly in the path of those who would kill to preserve lies. Suddenly, movement at the far end of the warehouse caught his attention. Figures stepping from shadow. He raised his hands instinctively. Marie moved with lethal grace between him and the threat. She whispered commands, and the figures froze, her authority silent and undeniable. The tension in the air thickened, the sound of distant engines and approaching footsteps outside signaling that their window of opportunity was shrinking and that every second mattered in the race against those who sought to silence the truth. Marie handed him another envelope with coordinates and instructions. He felt the weight of history in his hands, that the mission he had only known in fragments was now alive and complete, and that their actions tonight would determine whether the truth survived or was buried forever. He looked at her, realizing that she had not only survived impossible odds once, but had mastered the skill of navigating danger unnoticed, and that they were both now bound by the same purpose and the same peril. The hum of the city outside seemed distant and unreal as they moved toward the final stack of files. She whispered that the remaining records contained first-hand accounts, names, dates, and evidence that could validate everything she had told him, that the mission had succeeded, that the lost men had been rescued, and that every lie written in official reports could be exposed if they survived the night. He nodded, aware that they were seconds from confrontation and that the first sign of movement outside could trigger a deadly encounter. Suddenly, a noise at the far door, a metallic scrape, the sound of someone attempting entry. Marie froze, listening, her eyes scanning the darkness, and she whispered that they had been discovered. The Admiral felt the cold edge of panic, but trusted her instincts completely. She motioned him to move to a hidden alcove. As shadows slipped past the stacks and the first intruder appeared, ready to seize the files or them, the tension was unbearable, the night holding its breath, waiting for their next move. Marie stepped forward silently, confronting the intruder, her presence commanding. He could see the hesitation in the figure, as if recognizing an authority that was invisible yet undeniable. She spoke softly, and a command that sounded like a whisper froze the intruder in place. Then they retreated as silently. As they had appeared, he realized then that her authority came not from rank or uniform, but from experienced survival and sheer courage, and that this moment was a testament to everything she had endured and mastered. They gathered the remaining envelopes and files, moving toward the hidden exit. She whispered that the final leg of their journey would be the most dangerous, that pursuit would be relentless, that every step counted. The river, the city streets, and the shadows would all be allies or enemies, depending on their choices, and the Admiral understood with a chilling clarity that the stakes were higher than any mission he had ever commanded, that the truth could cost lives, and that time was slipping away faster than they could move. They reached the water again. Marie guided the boat carefully, keeping low and silent, the pursuing craft behind them, growing louder, cutting through the night. The Admiral gripped the side, trying to stay steady. The river carried them through narrow passages past shadows and reeds, each moment an exercise in focus and instinct. He realized that the metal in his possession represented more than bravery. It represented survival, deception, and the power of hidden truth, and that tonight they were both part of a story much larger than themselves. As the boat approached a concealed dock, Marie slowed her movement and gestured for him to follow. She whispered that the next challenge would test them further, that some forces would stop at nothing to claim or destroy the evidence, and that they would need all their skill, courage, and trust in each other to survive the coming hours. He nodded, feeling the tension spike and the cold edge of anticipation. The night seemed alive around them, carrying threats and secrets in equal measure, and he understood that the final confrontation was imminent. The first shadow appeared at the edge of the dock. A figure moving silently and deliberately. Marie positioned herself between the Admiral and the figure, ready to confront them. He held his breath, watching every movement, aware that a single misstep could be fatal. The night was a living entity, and the secrets they carried were alive with danger and promise, and he realized that nothing about this mission would ever be the same again. And as they prepared to move into the darkness together, he understood with certainty that the truth they had uncovered would change not only their lives, but the lives of everyone tied to that mission, and that the past had finally caught up with them. The dock was silent, except for the faint lapping of water against the boat, and Marie scanned the shadows carefully, her eyes sharp and calculating. The Admiral beside her gripped the envelope, tightly aware that every second now carried risk. The night seemed to close in on them, carrying secrets and danger intertwined, and he realized that the final leg of their journey would test every skill and instinct they had relied upon before. She motioned him to follow quietly, guiding the boat through narrow channels hidden beneath overhanging trees and thick reeds, the city lights behind them flickering faintly like eyes searching for movement. He noticed how her hands moved with practiced precision, her every motion deliberate and controlled, and he understood that she had survived more than just battles. She had survived the silence and deception of the system itself, and the river seemed to pulse beneath them as if aware of their mission. Suddenly, a noise came from the canal behind them, a sharp motor slicing through the night. Marie ducked low, keeping the boat steady. The Admiral followed instinctively, and they drifted into a smaller channel, nearly invisible to the pursuing craft. Every ripple in the water seemed magnified. He could hear his own pulse and the rhythm of the river as if counting down moments before confrontation, and he realized that the people pursuing them would not stop until the evidence and the witnesses were neutralized. Marie whispered that the coordinates led to a safe house hidden by decades of secrecy, and that the files they carried contained the truth that could unravel lies and reputations built over years. She gave him instructions in clipped tones, her voice steady but urgent, every word carrying weight and consequence. He nodded, keeping Low aware that a single misstep would expose them and that every shadow along the canal could hide a threat poised to strike. They arrived at the concealed dock. She guided him onto solid ground, their boots silent against moss and stone. The Admiral felt the tension coiling in his chest, each breath deliberate as they approached the entrance. A door hidden behind ivy and darkness. She produced a key from a pocket worn smooth by years of use and whispered that the past had prepared this place for moments like this. He realized with a chill that she had anticipated danger and betrayal and had planned for every contingency. Inside the safe house, the air smelled of dust and old paper, and the files lay stacked neatly, waiting to validate every word she had spoken. The Admiral ran his hands over the envelopes, tracing the markings, names, dates, and coordinates, and he understood that this was the culmination of years of courage, risk, and survival, that the medal he had once held lightly now represented a story of heroism, deliberately hidden from the world, and that they were holding proof that could not be ignored. Suddenly, movement at the far window caught his eye, figures in dark clothing attempting entry. Marie raised her hand and whispered a command. He froze, watching as she confronted them, her presence calm and lethal. The figures hesitated, recognizing authority unspoken, and then retreated silently into the night. He realized that her power did not come from uniform rank or accolades, but from experienced survival and sheer resolve, and that she had mastered the art of invisibility in plain sight. She motioned him to gather the files and move toward the back, exit a narrow path leading to another canal. He followed silently, aware that the outside world carried danger in every shadow and every ripple of sound. The night was alive with the threat of discovery, and the river seemed to respond to their urgency, carrying them toward a confrontation yet unseen, and he understood that the journey ahead would test them both physically and mentally. As they moved along the canal, Marie whispered that they were being watched, that intelligence networks and human surveillance were tracking every movement. She gave instructions to stay low, silent, and invisible. He followed obediently, realizing that their survival depended entirely on her instincts and the trust he placed in her experience. The night pressed close, and every echo seemed amplified in the stillness, carrying a warning of danger. Imminent. They reached a bridge crossing another channel, and Marie paused, scanning the edges, the water reflecting faint city lights. She whispered that this bridge had once been a route for escape and survival during the mission that had earned the medal, and that it would serve them again. He nodded and understood that history repeated itself, not always in the ways expected, but in moments of necessity, and that the river carried memory as much as water, and that the next steps would decide the fate of the evidence and their lives. A sudden splash behind them announced the arrival of the pursuing craft. Marie ducked low, maneuvering the boat skillfully. Into reeds and shadows, the Admiral held on, gripping tightly, aware that the wake of the motor engine marked relentless pursuit, every second ticking toward confrontation, and he felt adrenaline spike as he realized that the night could end in triumph, or disaster, depending on the precision and courage of the woman guiding them. Marie whispered that they would have to split if necessary, and that he should take the files and move toward the secondary exit. She would cover him. The Admiral understood. Instinctively, that hesitation could cost lives. He nodded, keeping low as she steered the boat into a hidden alcove, the water silent and dark, and the shadows seeming to swallow her as she disappeared briefly to create distance and distraction for those pursuing them. He felt the tension spike, knowing that any misstep could betray both of them. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the darkness at the edge of the canal. Moving with deliberate stealth, the Admiral froze, ready to confront the threat. But Marie returned from the reeds and positioned herself between him and the intruder, her stance calm, confident, and her eyes sharp. The figure hesitated, recognizing an invisible authority, and then retreated into the night, and he realized that Her command was not a matter of rank, but of skill, survival, and absolute mastery of fear. They regrouped at a hidden dock near a warehouse. Marie guided him carefully, the night thick with tension, every step measured and every sound amplified, he felt. The weight of responsibility pressing down, knowing that the files they carried represented decades of hidden truth, and that the people who wanted it buried would stop at nothing to recover or destroy it. She whispered that the final steps would test their courage and wits more than anything before. Inside the warehouse, the air was stale and dim light illuminated stacks of documents and recordings, proof of missions long erased from official history. Marie handed him envelopes with coordinates and instructions. He traced the markings, understanding that every name represented lives, risked or lost, and that they were the only witnesses alive carrying the story that would otherwise remain buried. The night seemed to stretch and pulse around them as if waiting for the next move. Suddenly, noises from the far door, a metallic scrape. The first intruders attempting to breach the warehouse. Marie froze her eyes, scanning the darkness, and whispered that they had been discovered. The Admiral felt the cold edge of panic but trusted her instincts. She motioned him to move to a concealed alcove. Shadows shifting and figures appearing and disappearing like phantoms waiting for an opportunity, and he understood that the confrontation was unavoidable and would determine whether the truth survived. Marie stepped forward, silently confronting the intruders, her voice calm yet commanding. They hesitated, recognizing her experience and resolve, and then retreated silently, the night thick. With tension and the weight of danger pressing down on every move, he realized that her mastery of survival was unparalleled and that the evidence they carried was now within reach. But the pursuit outside had not ended, and every second was a battle. They gathered the remaining files and moved toward the back exit, Marie whispering instructions, the river awaiting them outside the city, silent but alive with possibility, every shadow a potential threat, every ripple a warning. The Admiral understood that the next moments would determine the fate of the truth, and that courage alone would not suffice without trust, coordination, and precise action. As they stepped into the canal, the night wrapped around them, Marie guiding the boat skillfully, pursuing craft behind them, engines loud, cutting through water tension thick as fog. He gripped the sides, aware that history rested in their hands, and that the secrets of the mission and the lives of those involved would either emerge into daylight or vanish forever into shadow. And he realized with a cold certainty that survival depended on the skill and experience of the woman beside him. And as they disappeared into the darkness of the night, carrying the evidence, the truth, and their own lives, he understood that nothing about this mission would ever be the same again, and that the stories buried for decades were finally awake and moving with purpose.